MaXXXine, directed by Ty West, stars Mia Goth, Kevin Bacon, Giancarlo Esposito, and many more in this ensemble cast. In 1980s Hollywood, adult film star and aspiring actress Maxine Minx gets her big break, but as a mysterious killer stalks the starlets of Hollywood, a trail of blood threatens to reveal her sinister past. I've been pretty excited to see this movie, as the trailers for it looked really interesting, and due to the fact that I've been keeping up with this trilogy as much as possible. I'm in the small minority of people that didn't really enjoy X, but did find some cool moments in there. Definitely enjoyed Pearl a lot more. I think more effort was put into that movie. Mia Goth is really stellar as this version of Pearl. I think the aesthetic of that film is really well done too, and I just find it to be the better movie. So, what did I think of this third installment in the franchise? Mia Goth is definitely doing a good job here. While I don't think her character as Maxine is anywhere near as interesting as Pearl in this movie, she still puts out some really great moments, balancing an interesting mix of desperation and longing to be famous, while also giving these moments of being a cold and cunning woman who doesn't take shit from anyone. It's basically because of this reason where I can't exactly call her a scream queen in this movie, as she doesn't do all too much screaming and being in peril, besides the segment near the end of the movie. It can be hard for audiences to relate to her character depending on the person, as there are many times where the character acts pretty selfishly in order to get what she wants. However, when we see these moments, Mia Goth still sells it pretty well. Elizabeth Debicki plays a director in this movie. She's good as coming across as another force of nature that will do anything in her power to get her film made, while also being very stern and cold-hearted. While I think she pulls this off well, I can't help but dislike the way in which her character is written. I pray Ty West isn't this type of director in real life, because her character almost serves as a self-insert character from the way her and Maxine have exchanges with one another. I don't know how far into development this situation happened, but for those who don't know, Mia Goth got into this controversy by allegedly kicking a crew member in the head. I haven't heard if these were proven to be false, so that's why I say allegedly, but whenever these happened, it really feels like they wove that into the script somehow by having some really on-the-nose lines that felt kind of cringe to listen to, as much as I don't like using that word. It was a very odd choice to take these characters almost into this meta-narrative coinciding with the movie, and I don't think it worked here at all. Kevin Bacon plays a private detective in this, and outside of an interesting accent, you can tell from the start he's having so much fun in this role. He chews up the scenery whenever he's on screen, which is basically what he does in every movie I've seen him in, but even being paired with Mia Goth in the same scenes together, I think he steals the show every time. You can never fully tell what he's really up to. There's a hint he has some ulterior motive, and he can basically snap and cause things to go south at any chance he gets, and I really like how he plays into that angle so much here. Giancarlo Esposito did a really good job in this too, finally getting to somewhat show his range again as he plays the talent agent for Maxine. He has a chance to show off his fun side that he was known for earlier in his career, for example in the movie Do the Right Thing. He just has this bubbly personality, and the connection between him and Maxine is palpable. It almost feels like we missed a whole movie about these two working together, trying to get Maxine to where she is in her career when this movie starts, which I think could be an interesting thing to explore in the future. He doesn't get as much screen time as what I would have hoped, but for the scenes he's in, he's another actor that really chews up the scenery whenever he appears. The duo of Bobby Cannavale and Michelle Monaghan was a fun pairing to see here too. They have a good dynamic with each other that gave off this feeling as if off screen they have their own buddy cop movie going on. Cannavale has one or two pretty good moments where I thought his acting was pretty good, and same goes for Michelle Monaghan, even though the both of them didn't have much to do in the movie. I thought the aesthetic of this movie was done pretty well. It almost feels like a backhand to the 80s nostalgia Hollywood has been shoving down our throats for the past decade, as this movie opts to show the sleazier and dirtier side of LA, while still keeping that mesmerizing neon coat of paint the decade was infamous for. I appreciate the switch in influence in this movie too, where the first movie felt like an obvious nod to Texas Chainsaw and other 70s exploitation, and the second movie oozing with the charm of the silent era. The main influence on this movie feels very akin to the De Palma movies of the 80s, specifically his erotic thrillers like Body Double, complete with this movie's own version of the De Palma staple of having a split screen showing two different scenes going on at the same time. There's also some influence naturally to the 80s slasher genre, specifically in the giallo subgenre, with this film's killer having black gloves and having the audience not knowing who the killer is until the third act of the movie. I thought some of the kills were done pretty well here too. There's some nice squishy squelching gore, which this trilogy clearly wants to be remembered for. However, they're nothing too extravagant, but I'll always appreciate a horror that opts to do practical effects instead of CGI effects, which this movie chooses to do, and all the kills look really good here too. However, as much praise as I give this movie, it isn't without its flaws. I'm sad to report that this isn't the peak of the franchise in the slightest. For reference, if you were to ask where I'd rank these movies, it would go Pearl, then Maxine, and then X. I think the biggest problem I had with this movie was many segments in the screenplay itself. Like I said, they decided to take this meta angle using the characters of Maxine and Elizabeth Debicki's character as stand-ins for Mia Goth and Ty West, mainly for the people in the know. It just comes across as too self-absorbed with its on-the-nose dialogue, and it was very distracting. I also don't know how to feel on the moral and ethical judgment level, as this movie portrays its main villain to be real-life serial killer, the Night Stalker. Granted, some liberties were taken to ground the story in reality, but when you consider this real killer has many victims, some whose families are still alive today, it begs the question if this should have been the angle they went with, as intriguing as the initial idea sounds, because as this movie begins, the killer is framed to be more of a mysterious entity more than anything. If it was more respectful, in vein of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I maybe would have been more forgiving. As this movie goes on, it really becomes such a mess, especially in that third act. I'm all for camp and silliness, but with the previous tone this movie establishes, it almost feels like it's doing way too much to be out there. And there is a twist at the end of this movie, which I obviously can't say for spoiler reasons, but they don't do a good job to convey this as a twist, and it feels very obvious and cheap more than anything. It really is such a shame how this movie fumbles as it goes on and gets to its third act, because for the most part it shapes up to be a really good horror. Not anything game changing, and certainly nothing too frightening. There's minimum jump scares here too, which I did appreciate, but whenever they happen they don't feel like jump scares. So honestly, I have to give a point for doing that. Overall, I did like this movie, and I liked a lot of ideas I had going for it. Seeing the aesthetic and influence shine through was really appreciated as a fan of film and a fan of the genre. It's not on the level of being a so-called elevated horror movie, but it definitely portrays it through the lens of a more grand Hollywood movie, and I appreciate it for showing off the darker side of Hollywood. I think it's important to have movies that do that to an extent. The film Babylon did the same, and probably did it better, but it worked there. And it works here too. It certainly acts as a pretty entertaining horror movie, however it did really lose me more as it introduced different elements that felt like weren't needed at all, and ended up being a good time and a disappointment all in one. I'm giving Maxine 3.5 stars. It's very well acted and poses as a really entertaining time with a slick and stylish polish over the whole picture, but unfortunately it doesn't have enough here to really satisfy, and overall doesn't feel like a truly worthy conclusion to a trilogy. I did hope for this to be a lot better, however I still did like this movie, and would recommend it to horror fans, as it really has something that a lot of people would enjoy, if you're able to stomach a pretty zany climax.